This story is titled, At Our Wedding Ceremony, My Girlfriend Announced that all property acquired before marriage would remain hers alone, then said I should be thankful she's marrying such a loser, so I said okay and simply canceled the wedding. Days later, she was at my doorstep on her knees, begging for forgiveness, claiming she thought I wasn't serious. Hey everyone, I never thought I'd be writing this out, but here we are. My name is Tyler. I'm 29 years old, and my life has been absolute chaos for the past 8 months. I need to get this off my chest because honestly, I'm still trying to process everything that happened. I run a small nonprofit organization that helps veterans find jobs and housing when they transition out of the military. It's nothing fancy, just me and 5 other dedicated people busting our asses to make sure the guys and women who served our country don't end up on the street. We operate on a shoestring budget, stretching every dollar as far as it will go, but the work means everything to me. 4 years ago, I met Victoria. She was 28 at the time, and we crossed paths at this charity gala where my organization had received some small recognition award. She was there representing her law firm, looking absolutely stunning in a designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. We hit it off immediately and started dating pretty quickly after that. Victoria wasn't just rich, she was rich. We're talking about a corporate lawyer pulling in serious money, plus substantial bonuses, living in a designer world with a fancy uptown condo and all the expensive trappings that came with it. I'm talking about someone who could drop $400 on brunch without even blinking, while I was over here carefully stretching grant money to help another homeless veteran get back on their feet. Despite our vastly different financial situations, our relationship was mostly good for those 4 years. Sure, she'd occasionally make these little passive-aggressive digs about my work that would sting a bit. Comments like, "This is why I could never work in nonprofit," or "The money anxiety would kill me," or "Don't you want to do something more ambitious someday?" I chose to ignore these red flags because I genuinely thought she respected what I did, even if she didn't fully understand it. We got engaged last summer, and everything seemed to be on track. The wedding was set for this past April. All the plans were falling into place, and I thought we had a solid future ahead of us. That was until about 3 months ago, when the prenup conversation happened. That's when everything went straight to hell in ways I never could have imagined. She brought up the prenup one evening while we were at her place, just sitting on the couch together and flicking through some random shows on Netflix. The moment felt so casual and normal that what came next completely blindsided me. "So I think we should get a prenup," she said, her tone as casual as if she was suggesting what to order for dinner. "I've already talked to my lawyer about drafting something up." I blinked, caught completely off guard by the suddenness of it all. But honestly, I wasn't entirely surprised given the massive income gap between us. It made logical sense, and I figured it was just a formality that responsible couples handled before marriage. "Yeah, that's fine," I said, trying to keep my voice steady and reasonable. "Should protect both of us, right?" She looked at me with this expression like I'd just given the right answer on some kind of test. This bright, pleased smile stretched across her face in a way that, looking back, should have been my first warning sign. "Great! I'm thinking we keep all our finances completely separate, even after marriage," she continued enthusiastically. I frowned a little at that. Completely separate? Like, even for major purchases and important stuff? "Yeah, well, we'll have a joint account for household expenses," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "We can both contribute proportionally to our incomes, you know. Keep it fair." I nodded, thinking that sounded reasonable enough on the surface. But then she did something that should have made me run for the door right then and there. She slid a thick envelope across the coffee table toward me, and I could see papers sticking out of it. "I had my lawyer put together a draft already," she said, watching my reaction carefully. I'm no legal expert, but I started skimming through the document, and even with my limited understanding, I could tell this thing was completely one-sided. It basically stated that all of her current and future earnings, including bonuses, stock options, and investment gains, would remain exclusively hers. Meanwhile, anything I made would apparently go toward our joint expenses and household needs. There wasn't a single clause in that entire document that gave me any real stake or say in our financial life together as a married couple. I looked up at her, trying to process what I was reading. "This seems really unbalanced," I said, working hard to keep my tone calm and reasonable. "Shouldn't we at least make major financial decisions together once we're married? Like big purchases or investments or important stuff like that?" She laughed, but it wasn't a warm, genuine laugh. It was the kind of laugh that makes you feel like she's humoring someone who just said something completely ridiculous. I'll contribute to the household expenses, Tyler, she said, as if that solved everything. But my bonuses, my market gains, they stay in my accounts. She shrugged like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Let's be real here. I'm the financial expert in this relationship. I opened my mouth to say something about marriage being a partnership, about sharing major decisions even if she managed the money because she was better at it and had more experience. But before I could even finish forming my thoughts, she gave me this weird, calculating look that I'd never seen before. Look, Tyler, she said slowly and deliberately, like she was explaining something to a child. I've spent 12 years building my wealth. 12 years. I'm not risking half of it on someone who works with homeless vets for pocket change. The words hung in the air between us like a bomb that had just exploded. The room went completely silent, except for the sound of some random Netflix show playing in the background. Did she really just say that? Did she seriously reduce the work I've dedicated my entire adult life to work that actually helps people who served our country to pocket change? I could feel something cold and heavy settling deep in my chest, like a stone dropping into still water. I think I should go, I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. I could barely trust myself to speak any louder without completely losing my composure. She rolled her eyes in that dismissive way that somehow made everything worse. Don't be so sensitive, it's just business, Tyler. You know I support what you do, but let's be realistic about the money situation here. I didn't respond. I couldn't respond. Instead, I grabbed my jacket from the back of the chair, stood up on unsteady legs, and headed straight for the door. Every step felt like I was walking through thick mud. Where are you going? She demanded sharply, her tone suddenly shifting to something more aggressive. I turned to face her one last time, looking at this woman I thought I knew, this woman I'd planned to spend my life with. Thank you for your honesty, I said. And then I walked out of her apartment and out of her life. I went straight to my buddy Blake's place without even thinking about where else I could go. I didn't tell him what had happened at first. I just asked if I could crash on his couch for the night. I turned my phone completely off because Victoria was already blowing it up with calls, and I could see the screen lighting up every few seconds even through my pocket. All night long, I kept hearing those words echoing in my head like a broken record. Homeless vets for pocket change. 4 years together, 4 years of what I thought was love and mutual respect. And that's what she really thought of my work. That's what she really thought of me. That prenup wasn't just about protecting her assets, it was about making absolutely sure I knew my place in her world. And apparently, my place was somewhere far below her and her money. The next morning, I woke up to my phone completely exploded with notifications. 20+ missed calls and a seemingly endless stream of texts from Victoria, ranging from, "I'm so sorry, please call me," to "You're being ridiculous and immature." It was like watching someone work through the classic emotional manipulation playbook in real time. Blake handed me a cup of coffee and asked what the hell had happened. When I told him exactly what she'd said about my work, he just shook his head in disgust. "Dude, that's seriously messed up," he said. Blake is a Marine veteran himself and has volunteered at our nonprofit a few times over the years, so he understood the importance of what we do and how much it means to the people we help. I finally texted Victoria back around noon, keeping it short and to the point. "The wedding is off. I'll come get my stuff this weekend." That's when she went from apologetic to absolutely nuclear. Within an hour of that text, she was calling every single one of our mutual friends. And she wasn't just calling to chat. She was going full scorched earth, launching into this elaborate sob story about how I had supposedly walked out on her just because I wanted access to her money. According to one of my friends who called me later, she was hysterically crying and telling people that I'd been planning to use her financially all along. She claimed that when she very reasonably asked to protect her assets with a prenup, I had completely flipped out and stormed off like a child. The most insane part of all this. Some people actually believed her version of events. These were the same people who had watched me bust my ass for years, helping veterans for barely any pay, somehow suddenly thinking I was a gold digger who had been playing the long game for 4 years. It was mind-blowing. Most of our mutual friends did reach out to hear my side of the story, which I appreciated. I just told them exactly what she had said about my work. I didn't need to embellish or add dramatic flair. Her exact words were damning enough. I'm not risking half of it on someone who works with homeless vets for pocket change. Most people were genuinely shocked that she would say something so callous and cruel about work that helps vulnerable veterans. But Victoria wasn't done. Her next move was to start spreading even more elaborate rumors about our entire relationship. She told people that I had always resented her success, that I was jealous of her money, and she even claimed that I had pressured her to pay for things throughout our relationship, which was complete and utter bullshit. I had always insisted on paying my own way as much as humanly possible, even when it meant choosing significantly cheaper options or going without things I wanted. Meanwhile, I was sitting there trying to process the fact that my relationship of 4 years was completely over. The woman I thought I was going to marry, the person I thought I knew better than anyone, apparently saw my life's work as some cute little hobby that wasn't worth real money. That realization hurt more than I can adequately describe. Friday rolled around, and I texted her that I'd be coming by Saturday afternoon to collect my belongings. Her response was curt and cold. Fine. Be quick about it. Saturday came, and I showed up at her place with Blake in tow. I'd brought him along as a witness in case she tried to pull some crazy shit, which, given her behavior over the past few days, seemed like a distinct possibility. What I found when I walked into that apartment completely floored me. All of my stuff was packed up in garbage bags. Not boxes, not suitcases, actual garbage bags, like my belongings were literal trash that needed to be hauled away. I started going through the bags, checking to make sure everything was there. And I immediately noticed that some of my clothes had mysterious stains on them. My signed baseball jersey, which had been hanging clean in the closet, now had some kind of makeup smeared across it. This wasn't accidental damage from hasty packing. This was deliberate destruction of my property. "Where's my grandfather's watch?" I asked her, my voice tight with controlled anger. It was a vintage Rolex that my grandfather had left me when he died 5 years earlier. It wasn't super valuable in monetary terms, but it was completely irreplaceable to me, the only tangible thing I had left from him. She gave me this innocent, wide-eyed look that was so obviously fake it was almost insulting. "What watch?" "I didn't see any watch when I was packing your things." I knew she was lying. That watch was always in the same place, my bedside drawer where it lived every single night. "Victoria, that watch is the only thing I have from my grandfather." "Where is it?" "Maybe you left it somewhere else?" she said, with this little smirk playing at the corners of her mouth that made me want to put my fist through the nearest wall. That's when I pulled out my phone and started dialing. "Okay, I'm calling the police to report theft of a family heirloom." Her facial expression changed instantly, that smug look disappearing like someone had flipped a switch. "Don't be so dramatic. Let me check again." Miraculously, she suddenly found the watch in her bedroom, claiming she must have somehow overlooked it when she was packing all my stuff. "Yeah, right." As if a distinctive vintage Rolex would just blend into the background, I gathered up the rest of my garbage-bagged belongings and headed for the door, Blake helping me carry everything down to his truck. As we were loading the last bag, Victoria appeared in the doorway. "So that's it?" she said, her voice carrying this tone of wounded disbelief. 4 years together, and you're just walking away because of one comment?" I stopped and turned back to look at her standing there in her designer outfit, in her fancy apartment, surrounded by all the expensive material possessions that she obviously valued more than basic human decency or respect for the work I do. "It wasn't just a comment, Victoria," I said, meeting her eyes directly. "It was a window into how you really see me and what I do, and I don't like the view." I walked away, loaded my stuff into Blake's truck, and that was it. Relationship over, wedding canceled, 4 years of my life reduced to garbage bags and bitter words. I sent a brief, polite email to her parents, explaining that the wedding was off and thanking them for their hospitality over the years. They never responded, which honestly told me everything I needed to know about where Victoria had learned her values and attitudes toward people she considered beneath her social class. The next week was rough, to put it mildly. I threw myself completely into work at the nonprofit, trying to avoid thinking about the breakup and what it all meant. Every time I started feeling sorry for myself or questioning my choices, I reminded myself that I was doing work that actually helps people who desperately need it, regardless of what Victoria might think about it. Meanwhile, Victoria was still telling anyone who would listen that I was a gold digger who had wanted access to her money. The story kept evolving and changing, though, which should have been a red flag to anyone paying attention. First, I had supposedly stormed out when she merely mentioned getting a prenup. Then, the story became that I had demanded half of her assets. After that, it morphed into claims that I had been financially abusing her throughout our entire relationship, taking advantage of her generosity and manipulating her into paying for things. Each version was more ridiculous and elaborate than the last, but she kept spinning new tales to anyone who would give her an audience. I made the conscious decision to take the high road throughout all of this. I didn't respond to the rumors, I didn't trash her to our mutual friends, and I didn't engage with any of the drama at all. I just focused on moving forward with my life and putting this toxic situation behind me. I found a small apartment near the nonprofit office and started the process of settling into my new life. It was basic as hell compared to living in her luxury condo with all the high-end amenities, but it was mine. More importantly, I didn't have to justify my career choices or life decisions to anyone. There was something liberating about that independence, even if the apartment was a significant downgrade in terms of material comfort. But then, about 2 weeks after I'd moved out, my parents called one evening. My mom sounded genuinely worried when she spoke, which immediately put me on edge. "Tyler, honey, is everything okay? We got a strange call from Victoria's mother today," she said, her voice full of concern. My stomach dropped like a rock. I had a sinking feeling about where this conversation was headed. What did she say? She said you've been taking advantage of Victoria financially throughout your relationship, that you're angry and vindictive because she wouldn't give you access to her money. Honey, that doesn't sound like you at all, but we wanted to hear your side of things. I took a deep breath and explained the entire situation from start to finish. The prenup conversation, her cruel comments about my work, the systematic campaign of lies she'd been spreading since our breakup. I told them exactly what she had said about working with homeless veterans for pocket change and how that had been the final straw. There was a long silence on the other end of the line after I finished. Then my dad, who rarely gets worked up about anything and tends to be the calm, measured voice in our family, said something that surprised me. "That's the biggest load of horseshit I've ever heard in my life." "Richard!" my mom exclaimed, but I could tell from her tone that she agreed with his assessment completely. "No, I'm serious here. Our son works his ass off helping veterans for barely any pay, and this woman has the nerve to call him a gold digger after what she said about his work? That's completely backwards. My parents are solidly middle class. Dad's a retired electrician. Mom's been a teacher for over 20 years. They've always been incredibly proud of my nonprofit work, even if they sometimes worry about my financial security and whether I'm making enough to support myself long term." "We never believed it for a second," Mom assured me, her voice warm and supportive. "But we were concerned because these are serious accusations she's making. We wanted to make sure you were okay and get the real story." "I know," I sighed, feeling the weight of having to defend myself against lies. "She's been spreading these stories everywhere, trying to make me look like the bad guy." I figured that would be the end of it. A painful breakup with some accompanying drama. But eventually, we'd both move on with our lives, and this whole mess would fade into memory. I couldn't have been more wrong about what was coming next. About a week after my conversation with my parents, I got a phone call that made my blood run cold. It was from one of our biggest donors, Mr. Anderson, an older gentleman who gives us around $45,000 annually and has been incredibly supportive of our mission since we started. "Tyler, I got a disturbing email about you and your organization," he said, his voice serious and concerned. "I need to ask you about some allegations that have been made." My stomach immediately dropped to the floor. "What kind of email?" I asked, already having a terrible feeling about where this was going. "It claims you've been misusing funds from the nonprofit, taking cash donations for personal use, spending organization money on personal expenses, that sort of thing. Normally, I'd ignore anonymous allegations like this, but this email had a lot of specific details that made me concerned enough to call you directly." I was completely floored. This was a whole new level of vindictive behavior that I never could have anticipated. "Mr. Anderson, none of that is true. Can you forward me the email so I can see exactly what's being claimed?" He agreed and sent it over immediately. As soon as I opened it and started reading, I knew without any doubt that it was from Victoria. It was sent from some random Gmail account, but it was clearly her, the writing style, the specific details that only she would know, the timing of it all. There was no question in my mind. The email accused me of pocketing cash donations, using nonprofit funds for personal vacations, and other complete fabrications. One specific example it cited was a time when I had visited a veteran while on a trip with Victoria and got reimbursed for gas mileage. Something that was completely legitimate and properly documented. But Victoria was trying to twist it into evidence of financial misconduct. It was all absolute bullshit, but presented in a way that could sound convincing to someone who didn't know the full context. I immediately explained the entire situation to Mr. Anderson, that this was my ex-fiancée trying to hurt me after our breakup, and that she was now targeting the nonprofit as part of her revenge campaign. I walked him through each allegation point by point, showing how they were either completely false or gross misrepresentations of legitimate, documented expenses. Thankfully, Mr. Anderson believed me completely. He'd known me for years and had seen our organization's financial audits and transparency reports. I figured it might be something like that, he said with a sigh. Just wanted to give you a heads up. Nasty business breakups. Some people don't handle them well. I thanked him profusely and hung up the phone. But then I just sat there staring at the forwarded email on my computer screen. This was a whole new level of vindictive behavior that I hadn't seen coming. She wasn't just trying to hurt me personally anymore. She was actively trying to destroy the nonprofit I'd built from the ground up. She was trying to hurt the veterans we serve, people who had nothing to do with our relationship drama. That's when I realized this war was just beginning, and Victoria wasn't going to stop with one email. Over the next 4 weeks, every single one of our donors received similar emails. I'm not exaggerating when I say every single one. Different email accounts each time, but the same basic accusations presented in slightly different ways. Some donors even got multiple messages with what was supposedly new evidence of my corruption and financial misconduct. I only found out about the scope of this campaign because donors started calling me directly to ask about the allegations. Most of them, like Mr. Anderson, had known me for years and were immediately skeptical of anonymous accusations from random email addresses. But a few of our newer donors were genuinely concerned, and I can't blame them for that. If I received a detailed email claiming that a charity I supported was misusing funds, I'd want to look into it too. I spent countless hours on the phone reassuring people, explaining the breakup situation, and digging up financial records to prove that everything was above board. Meanwhile, I was also trying to actually run the nonprofit and help the veterans who depended on our services. The actual job I was supposed to be doing. Our finance director, Lisa, started compiling and analyzing all the forwarded emails we received from concerned donors. She's incredibly detail-oriented and methodical, and she quickly noticed patterns that confirmed what I already suspected. It was definitely Victoria behind all of this. This is systematic and coordinated, Lisa told me, showing me her analysis spread across her desk. She's working through our donor list methodically, not just sending random angry messages. These aren't spontaneous attacks. This is a calculated campaign. Lisa had identified specific details about events that only Victoria had attended, the same grammatical quirks and writing style that Victoria always had, and references to trips we'd taken together that wouldn't be public knowledge. The evidence was overwhelming. That's when it hit me like a ton of bricks, the donor list. Victoria had occasionally used my laptop when we were living together, usually for simple things like checking email or browsing the internet. She must have copied our entire donor database during one of those times. That's how she knew exactly who to target, had all their email addresses, and knew enough personal details about our organization to make her lies seem credible to people who didn't know better. Just as we were dealing with the email situation and trying to reassure our donor base, Victoria decided to escalate things even further. She started posting one-star reviews of our nonprofit on every platform she could find: Google, Yelp, Charity Navigator, GuideStar, Facebook, and probably others I didn't even know existed. She didn't just create one fake account either. She made multiple accounts with names designed to sound like real concerned people: disappointed veteran, charity watchdog, concerned donor, and other variations. She was trying to make it look like multiple unrelated people had serious complaints about our organization and the way we operated. These fake reviews claimed we were scammers who preyed on vulnerable veterans, said we promised services we never actually delivered, alleged that we pressured desperate veterans for donations, and made other completely fabricated accusations. Every single claim was a lie, but they were presented in a way that could damage our reputation with potential donors and the veterans we were trying to help. Our donation numbers started tanking almost immediately. The fake reviews and email campaign were having their intended effect, and it was devastating to watch years of reputation building crumble because of one person's vindictive lies. We had several people cancel their monthly contributions, citing concerns about the allegations they'd seen online. A couple of our corporate partners called wanting clarification on the accusations, and I could hear the doubt in their voices, even though they were trying to be diplomatic. Our reputation, which I'd spent years carefully building through honest work and transparent operations, was taking serious hits. Every day brought new damage as Victoria's campaign gained momentum across multiple platforms. Finally, I decided I had to try reaching out to Victoria directly. It was the only time I broke my self-imposed no-contact rule since the breakup. I sent her a simple, straightforward text message. "I know what you're doing. Please stop. You're not hurting me. You're hurting veterans who need help." Her response came back quickly and was exactly what I should have expected. I don't know what you're talking about. Maybe your little charity is getting bad reviews because it's actually bad. Ever think of that? That smug, dismissive tone came through even in a text message. I just sat there staring at my phone screen, feeling like I was reading a message from a complete stranger. The woman I'd once loved, the person I'd planned to spend my life with, had been replaced by someone filled with pure venom hiding behind a facade of innocent confusion. So I decided to fire back. I'd been taking the high road for weeks, but enough was enough. I kept it together, but I didn't hold back. Don't you think you're pathetic, honestly? You're not exposing anything. You're just lashing out because you're miserable and things didn't go your way. You're willing to sabotage something that actually helps people, all because your pride got hurt. That's not justice. That's pathetic. She took her time responding to that one. A couple of minutes passed, and I was almost convinced she just blocked me in silence rather than continue the conversation. But then her reply came through, and somehow her words managed to hit that perfect mix of snark and spite that she'd always been so good at. Wow, someone's feeling righteous today. Must be exhausting walking around pretending to be the good guy all the time. Don't act like you're above anyone. You think hiding behind a charity makes you untouchable? Newsflash. Not everyone sees you the way you see yourself. Maybe you're not the victim you think you are. Maybe you're just a guy with a savior complex and a bruised ego. Then she blocked me. Classy move, getting in the last word and then cutting off any possibility of response. Just when I thought Victoria's campaign couldn't possibly get any worse, she decided to take things to a whole new level that honestly left me speechless. We were hosting this housing resource fair for homeless veterans, one of our biggest events of the year. About 60 veterans had shown up looking for help with housing, job placement, and other essential services. It was exactly the kind of event that made all our hard work feel worthwhile. Halfway through the event, while veterans were meeting with housing representatives and going through resource materials, Victoria walked in. Before anyone could react or even process what was happening, she started screaming at the top of her lungs. Don't trust these people, they're frauds! Tyler takes your donation money and spends it on vacations. They're under investigation. The entire room went dead silent. Veterans, volunteers, housing representatives, everyone just stared in complete shock. I was frozen, completely blindsided by the audacity of what she was doing. This wasn't just attacking me anymore. She was directly disrupting services for vulnerable veterans who desperately needed help. Thankfully, David, one of our regular volunteers and a former Marine, stepped in immediately. He calmly approached Victoria, keeping his voice low and controlled. Ma'am, this is a private event for veterans. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Do you know what he did to me? She shrieked, pointing directly at me. He used me for years. He's using all of you too. By this point, 2 other volunteers were flanking David. One of them, a veteran named Carlos, had his phone out and was recording the entire incident. Smart move, as it turned out later. Ma'am, please don't make us call the police, David said firmly but respectfully. There are people here who need these services. She looked around the room, suddenly seeming to realize where she was and what she was doing. For just a split second, I saw something that might have been shame cross her face. Then it was gone, replaced by pure rage. You'll all see the truth eventually, she spat, then turned and stormed out, nearly knocking over a table full of informational brochures on her way. After she left, I had to stand up in front of everyone and explain that this was my ex-fiancée, that we'd recently broken up, and that her accusations were completely false. It was hands down the most awkward and humiliating moment of my professional life, having to air my personal drama in front of the people I was supposed to be helping. The next day, we discovered that Victoria had somehow gotten the phone numbers of veterans we were actively helping and started calling them directly. She was telling them that our organization was under investigation by authorities and would be shut down soon, so they should look for help elsewhere. Think about how messed up that is. She was actively trying to prevent vulnerable veterans from getting the housing and job assistance they desperately needed. Our program manager, Jennifer, was absolutely beside herself when she started getting calls from confused and worried veterans. Tyler, we need to do something about this, she said, her voice tight with frustration and concern. This isn't just about you and Victoria anymore. She's actively harming the people we're trying to help. She was absolutely right, and that realization hit me like a freight train. This had gone way beyond a vindictive ex-fiancé trying to hurt me personally. Victoria was now systematically trying to destroy an organization that helps some of the most vulnerable people in our society. all because her ego couldn't handle being dumped. The collateral damage of her revenge campaign was affecting real people who had served our country and were now struggling to get back on their feet. The final straw came when we had to cancel one of our housing programs due to funding shortfalls from the donations we'd lost. That's when I knew I had to stop taking the high road and fight back, not for me, but for the veterans who were being harmed by her actions. I called Rebecca, our nonprofit's general counsel, who usually helps us with contract reviews, compliance issues, and other routine legal matters. I explained the entire situation from start to finish and showed her all the evidence we'd gathered of Victoria's systematic campaign against our organization. Rebecca reviewed everything methodically: the fake emails to donors, the fraudulent online reviews, the harassment of veterans, and the disruption of our services. When she finished, her assessment was clear and direct. "This is textbook defamation," Rebecca said, looking up from the pile of printed emails and screenshots. "And because it's specifically targeting a nonprofit organization that serves a protected population, a judge might be particularly unsympathetic to her behavior." "I don't want to sue her," I said, feeling conflicted about the whole situation. "Lawsuits are expensive and time-consuming, and we need to focus our energy and resources on our mission of helping veterans." Rebecca leaned forward, her expression serious. "Tyler, your mission is being actively undermined by these attacks. Sometimes the best defense is a strong offense. We need to send a clear message that she can't get away with this kind of behavior without serious consequences." I sat there for a long moment, thinking about all the veterans who weren't getting housing assistance because of canceled programs. I thought about the donors who had withdrawn their support because of Victoria's lies, and about future veterans who might not seek our help because our reputation had been damaged by her systematic campaign of defamation. "Okay," I finally said, making the decision that would change everything. "Let's do it." The first step was gathering and organizing all of our evidence, and honestly, when we laid it all out, it was sobering to see the full scope of what Victoria had done. This wasn't just a few angry messages or emotional outbursts after a bad breakup. This was a methodical, comprehensive attempt to completely dismantle something I'd spent years building, something that actually helped people who needed it. We filed a defamation lawsuit against Victoria, asking for monetary damages based on our documented lost donations, compensation for the harm to our organization's reputation, and punitive damages for deliberately targeting a veteran service organization. Rebecca explained that the punitive damages were particularly important, not just to compensate us for what we'd lost, but to send a clear message that this kind of vindictive behavior has serious legal consequences. When Victoria got served with the legal papers, she completely lost her mind. She called me screaming about how I was trying to ruin her life and career, apparently completely oblivious to the irony of that accusation. The woman who had spent months trying to systematically destroy my organization was now outraged that there might be consequences for her actions. Her response to being sued was exactly what I should have expected. She countersued me. Her lawsuit claimed that I had emotionally abused her throughout our entire relationship, and that everything she had said about the nonprofit was actually true. It was classic Darvo deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender. She was trying to paint herself as the real victim in this situation, while she was actively trying to destroy a charity that helps homeless veterans. The whole thing was unbelievable, but at least now we were in the legal system where facts and evidence would matter more than manipulative storytelling, while she was actively trying to destroy a charity for homeless veterans. The audacity was absolutely unbelievable, but at least now we were operating within the legal system where facts and evidence would matter more than manipulative storytelling and emotional appeals. That's when things got really interesting. The case got assigned to Judge Martinez, and during our first hearing, he made it crystal clear that he was taking the allegations against a veteran service organization very seriously. His tone and demeanor left no doubt about where his sympathies lay. The court recognizes the vital role that nonprofit organizations play in supporting our veterans, particularly in areas where government services fall short, he said during the proceedings, giving Victoria a look that could have frozen hell itself. I'm not saying he was biased against her from the start, but he definitely wasn't buying into her victim routine from the very beginning. Then came the discovery phase of the lawsuit, the part where both sides have to share all relevant evidence and documentation. We had to turn over our financial records, donor communications, internal emails, and basically everything related to our operations. I wasn't worried about this at all because we had absolutely nothing to hide. Our books are clean, our services are real and well documented, and our impact on the veteran community is thoroughly recorded. But Victoria also had to turn over her emails, text messages, and other communications related to her campaign against our organization. And that's where things got absolutely wild, and her whole facade started crumbling. Her lawyer, some high-priced attorney from her firm's recommended list, looked physically pained as the evidence started coming in during discovery. It became clear that he was realizing just how bad his client's case really was and how much trouble she was actually in. It turned out that Victoria hadn't just been sending a few angry emails in the heat of the moment. She had been planning and executing this campaign meticulously, like it was some kind of military operation. We got access to spreadsheets where she had systematically tracked our donors, scheduled follow-up attacks, and even noted which specific lies and accusations worked best with different types of people. She had created over a dozen fake email accounts and social media profiles to make it look like multiple unrelated people had serious issues with our nonprofit. The level of premeditation and organization was honestly stunning. This wasn't emotional retaliation. This was calculated warfare. But here's the really damaging part. She had done all of this using her work computer at the law firm, something I'm absolutely sure her bosses wouldn't be thrilled to discover when it all came to light. The real bombshell in the discovery process came from Victoria's own firm's compliance officer. It turned out that this person had already flagged Victoria for possible ethical violations after hearing about her comments regarding veterans and her behavior following our breakup. The compliance officer had actually reported her to the firm's ethics committee even before our lawsuit was filed. At Victoria's deposition, she initially stuck to her story about me being financially abusive and the nonprofit being somehow shady or corrupt. She maintained this narrative right up until her own emails and text messages were presented as evidence and read back to her word for word. That's when she started completely unraveling. The breaking point came when one particularly damning email she had sent to a donor was read aloud. This donor happened to be a Gold Star parent, someone who had lost a child in military service. After hearing her own words read back to her in that context, Victoria broke down crying in the middle of her deposition. "I was just so angry," she admitted through her tears. "I wanted him to hurt like I was hurting." Her lawyer's facial expression when she said that was absolutely priceless. You could practically see him calculating how much of his retainer he could keep without having to go through with the full trial, knowing that his client had just destroyed any chance they had of winning. The actual trial itself only lasted 3 days, which is relatively short for this type of case. Our evidence was simply overwhelming, and Victoria's legal team didn't have much to work with in terms of a coherent defense. Victoria's lawyer made a half-hearted attempt to paint her as a woman scorned who had made some regrettable but understandable mistakes in the heat of emotion following a painful breakup. He tried to frame her actions as temporary lapses in judgment rather than the systematic campaign they actually were. Judge Martinez wasn't having any of it. "The systematic nature of these actions goes well beyond an emotional response to a breakup," he said during the proceedings, his voice carrying clear disapproval. "This appears to be a calculated attempt to destroy an organization serving vulnerable veterans using methods that any reasonable person would know could cause significant harm." Victoria's testimony during the trial was an absolute disaster for her case. She came across as entitled, vindictive, and completely unconcerned about the veterans who had lost essential services because of her actions. Her attitude on the witness stand was exactly what you'd expect from someone who had never faced real consequences for her behavior before. At one point during her testimony, she actually said, "It's not like they don't have other options for help," referring to the homeless veterans who were affected by her campaign. The comment was so tone-deaf and callous that it caused Judge Martinez to remove his glasses and stare at her for a solid 15 seconds of uncomfortable silence. You could feel the entire courtroom holding its breath during those moments. After all the testimony was heard and all the evidence was presented, it didn't take the judge very long to reach his verdict. Victoria was found liable for defamation, with Judge Martinez specifically noting the extraordinary and malicious nature of her actions in his ruling. The damages awarded were substantial, $2.1 million total. This broke down to $850,000 for lost donations and actual damages to the nonprofit, plus $1.25 million in punitive damages for what the judge termed extraordinarily malicious conduct targeting an organization serving vulnerable veterans. When the amount was announced in court, Victoria gasped audibly, her face going completely white. Her lawyer immediately whispered something to her, probably explaining that yes, she really did have to pay that much money, and no, there wasn't some legal loophole that would get her out of it. I want to be absolutely clear here. I didn't want Victoria's money for myself or for any kind of personal gain. Every single cent of that judgment would go directly back into the nonprofit to restore the programs we'd had to cut and expand our services to help even more veterans. This was never about getting rich or getting revenge. It was about making things right for the people who had been harmed by her vindictive campaign. Victoria started crying in court when the full scope of the financial judgment sank in, saying through her tears that she couldn't possibly pay that amount. That's when Judge Martinez delivered the line that I'll remember until the day I die. "Perhaps you shouldn't have risked your wealth on attacking homeless vets for pocket change," he said, using her exact words from that night at her apartment against her. He had taken the very phrase that started this entire mess, the cruel comment that revealed her true feelings about my work, and turned it back on her. The poetic justice was almost too perfect to believe. But the story doesn't end there, because Victoria's downfall was really just beginning to unfold in earnest. The very next day after the verdict, I got a phone call from Rebecca that I honestly wasn't expecting. "You're not going to believe this," she said, sounding genuinely shocked, even though she's usually pretty unflappable. Victoria's law firm just fired her. It turned out that the law firm Victoria worked for had a strict ethics code. Who would have thought? And apparently being found liable for maliciously attacking a veteran charity violated those standards pretty clearly. But it wasn't just the verdict itself that got her terminated. It was also the discovery during our lawsuit that she had used company resources, including her work computer, company time, and possibly even access to confidential client information, to orchestrate her systematic campaign against our organization. The compliance officer who had been keeping an eye on Victoria throughout this whole process had presented all the evidence to the firm's ethics committee, along with the complete court transcripts from our trial. The committee didn't even give her a chance to explain herself or mount any kind of defense. They just called her into a meeting, told her she was terminated effective immediately, and had building security escort her out with her personal belongings packed in a cardboard box. But it gets even better than that. With the lawsuit now a matter of public record, Victoria became completely radioactive in the legal world. No other firm would even consider hiring her. Her fancy professional network that she had been so proud of disappeared overnight, which was really quite amazing to witness. It's incredible how fast wealthy, well-connected friends bail when your reputation tanks and you can't do anything useful for them anymore. Meanwhile, she still had to pay that $2.1 million judgment, and given that she no longer had her cushy six-figure job bringing in serious money every year, this became a very serious financial problem for her very quickly. About 3 weeks after the verdict was finalized, our nonprofit received the first payment, $650,000. It turned out that Victoria had to liquidate a significant portion of her investment portfolio just to cover this initial payment. According to the payment plan that had been approved by the court, she would be required to pay the rest in installments over the next 3 years, with interest accruing on the outstanding balance. But Victoria's financial situation just kept deteriorating rapidly. Without her high-paying job, she couldn't keep up with her expensive lifestyle and all the financial obligations that came with it. That fancy uptown condo she was so proud of? She had to sell it. The designer wardrobe that filled her walk-in closet? Most of it ended up on consignment websites. The luxury car she drove. She had to trade it in for something basic and practical. I didn't go looking for this information, by the way. Our lawyer kept tabs on Victoria's finances to ensure we'd actually get the full judgment payment, and mutual acquaintances naturally filled in the rest of the details. Plus, Victoria herself couldn't help posting cryptic, passive-aggressive content on social media about starting over and dealing with betrayal. It was classic vague booking from someone who desperately wanted attention and sympathy without actually admitting they had screwed up. Then, about 2 weeks later, Blake sent me a screenshot that made me do a double take. It was Victoria on LinkedIn, posting some inspirational word salad about second chances and learning from mistakes. The post was full of classic corporate speak, clearly trying to rehabilitate her image and make herself look like someone who had grown from adversity. That turned out to be a big mistake on her part. The very first comment on her post was brutal. "Aren't you the woman who tried to destroy a homeless veteran charity because your boyfriend dumped you? Miss me with this redemption arc bullshit." But then, another commenter dropped what can only be described as a nuclear bomb. They posted the video that Carlos had recorded during our housing resource fair, the one where Victoria was screaming at homeless veterans, along with the comment, "For anyone wondering what learning from mistakes looks like, here's her screaming at homeless veterans." The video went absolutely viral in the veteran community. It got shared thousands of times across every military Facebook group, Reddit thread, and veteran-focused social media platform you can imagine. Veterans have tight-knit online communities, and when something like this surfaces, it spreads like wildfire. Victoria tried to do damage control by posting another statement about going through a difficult time in her life and making mistakes during emotional distress. That was the wrong move entirely. Veterans on social media started digging through her entire social media history, going back years to find problematic posts. They found posts where she had mocked PTSD, called veterans entitled for seeking benefits, and made fun of what she referred to as Tyler's little homeless friends. All of this was compiled into a massive thread called Corporate Lawyer Greatest Hits: Why Victoria Chen Hates Veterans. Her LinkedIn post ended up with over 12,000 comments, and every single one of them was absolutely brutal. The pile-on was so intense that LinkedIn actually had to limit commenting on the post. Victoria deleted all of her social media accounts just 3 days later, but by then the damage was already done, and the screenshots were everywhere. 8 months after the verdict, Victoria was living in a studio apartment in a part of town that she would have sneered at and refused to even drive through during our relationship. She was working as a paralegal at a small legal aid office, making maybe a quarter of what she used to earn at the corporate firm. She was still making payments on the judgment, though they were much smaller amounts that had been approved by the court based on her drastically reduced income. Her parents cut her off financially as well, which honestly surprised me since they had always seemed to support her unconditionally no matter what she did. But apparently, they were genuinely disgusted by what she had done to hurt veterans. Her father, as it turned out, was a retired Air Force officer, something that Victoria had somehow never mentioned to me during our 4 years together, which says a lot about her relationship with her family's military background. When Victoria's parents found out that she had actively tried to harm veterans and disrupt services for homeless people who had served their country, that was apparently the last straw for them. They refused to help her financially or otherwise, cutting off what could have been a significant source of support during her legal and financial troubles. I know all of this might sound like I'm gloating over Victoria's misfortune, but I'm really not. There's honestly no satisfaction in seeing someone you once loved completely self-destruct like this. It's just sad and depressing to watch. All of this, the lawsuit, her job loss, her financial ruin, the destruction of her reputation, could have been completely avoided if she had just respected my work and moved on with her life when our relationship ended. As for me and the nonprofit, we're doing better than we ever have before. After the story hit the local news with headlines like "Corporate Lawyer Ordered to Pay $2.10 million for Defaming Veteran Charity," donations started pouring in from all over the region. People love an underdog story, and the publicity around our case raised our profile enormously. We were able to restore all the programs that Victoria's campaign had forced us to cancel, and we even expanded our services to help more veterans than ever before. Then, about 5 months later, I was just relaxing at home and watching a basketball game when someone knocked on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I checked the peephole to see who it could be. It was Victoria. She looked completely different from the last time I'd seen her. No designer clothes, no perfect makeup, no expensive accessories. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she was wearing basic, unremarkable clothing that looked like it came from a discount store. For a few seconds, I honestly thought about not answering the door at all. But curiosity got the better of me. "What do you want?" I asked through the door, not wanting to open it just yet. "Just to talk," she said, and her voice sounded strange, quieter, less confident than I'd ever heard it before. "Please, Tyler, just 5 minutes." Against my better judgment, I opened the door but didn't invite her in. She stood there looking smaller somehow, like all the arrogance and entitlement had been completely drained out of her. "Can I come in?" she asked hopefully. "No," I said firmly. "We can talk here." I didn't want her inside my space, and I didn't trust her not to be recording our conversation or planning some other kind of manipulation. She nodded like she expected that response, which suggested she had thought this through beforehand and knew I wouldn't be welcoming her with open arms. I wanted to apologize," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What I did was wrong, all of it. I was hurt and angry, and I went way too far." I just stared at her, trying to process the fact that after everything she had done, the systematic campaign to destroy my organization, the harassment of vulnerable veterans, the months of lies and manipulation, she thought a simple "sorry" would somehow fix everything. "Did your therapist tell you to do this?" I asked, unable to keep the skepticism out of my voice. Some kind of making amends step in whatever program you're working? She looked down at her feet, suddenly seeming smaller and more fragile than I'd ever seen her. Actually, yes. I've been seeing someone, trying to understand why I did what I did. And what's the verdict? I asked, not bothering to hide my cynicism. Why did you try to destroy an organization that helps homeless veterans just because I broke up with you? She flinched visibly at my bluntness, but I wasn't in the mood to sugarcoat anything or make this easier for her. She had earned every bit of discomfort this conversation was causing her. I've always defined myself by my success, she said slowly, like she was reciting something she'd practiced in therapy sessions. My job, my money, my status. When you walked away from me so easily, it made me feel worthless. Like all that stuff I valued didn't matter to you at all. She paused, taking a shaky breath before continuing. So I wanted to show you that what you value didn't matter either. It was probably the most honest thing she had ever said to me in all the years I'd known her. For a moment, I could see glimpses of the self-awareness that therapy had apparently helped her develop. But that didn't change what she had done, or the people who had been hurt because of her actions. You hurt a lot of people, Victoria. Not just me, I said, my voice steady but firm. Veterans who needed housing, people who were counting on our services, donors who trusted us, real people with real problems. I know, she whispered, and I could see tears starting to form in her eyes. I can't fix that, but I'm still making the payments, and She hesitated, like she was debating whether to tell me something. I'm volunteering at a veterans center across town, she said finally. Not as court-ordered community service or anything like that. Just trying to understand what I was attacking. Trying to see what you saw in this work. I honestly didn't know what to say to that revelation. Part of me wanted to believe that she was genuinely remorseful and trying to make some kind of meaningful change in her life. But another part of me remembered how methodically and systematically she had tried to dismantle everything I had worked for. How she had looked me in the eye and lied repeatedly. How she had screamed at homeless veterans who were just trying to get help. I appreciate you coming by, I finally said, choosing my words carefully. But I think it's better if we don't have any contact going forward. She nodded slowly, her eyes still focused on the ground. I understand. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry, for what it's worth. As she turned to leave, she stopped and added one more thing without looking back at me. You were right, by the way. What you do, it matters. It's worth more than what I was doing. I see that now. And then she was gone, walking away down the hallway and disappearing around the corner. I closed the door and just stood there for several minutes, staring at nothing in particular. I felt completely hollow, not angry, not satisfied, just emotionally drained. It was like she had taken one last emotional withdrawal from my account before disappearing from my life for good. I haven't heard from Victoria since that conversation, and honestly, I don't expect to. Sometimes I think about that final interaction and wonder whether her apology was genuine or just another form of manipulation. I wonder whether people can really change that fundamentally, or if they just get better at presenting a different version of themselves to the world. I don't know the answers to those questions, and I'm not sure I ever will. What I do know is that I've learned a tremendous amount through this entire experience. I've learned about myself, about relationships, about how quickly someone can turn from loving to vengeful when their ego gets bruised. I've learned that doing work you believe in, work that actually helps vulnerable people, is worth standing up for, even when someone tries to tear it down out of spite. But mostly, I've learned that some people will show you exactly who they are when they don't get what they want, and when they do, you should believe them the first time. Victoria showed me her true character that night with the prenup, and everything that followed was just confirmation of what I had already learned about who she really was underneath all the designer clothes and corporate success. The nonprofit continues to thrive. We're helping more veterans than ever before, and I've found peace in knowing that we stood up to someone who tried to destroy something meaningful out of pure vindictiveness. Sometimes, doing the right thing costs you, but in the end, it's always worth it.